What's up, everybody? Welcome to what is going to be our last online lecture of the year. We made it, you guys. This is the last bit of new content, and then your final exam is going to be online next week. We will talk about that a little bit more. Hopefully, by the time you're watching this, I have posted the announcement with the link to the Google form where you can respond and say when you'd like to have our little Q&A session about the final, but I would like to sit down with you guys and kind of explain how all that is going to work, because there are kind of a lot of moving parts for the end of the semester. And if you're watching this weekend when we've already had that meeting, awesome, you're ready to go. So this is our last bit of new content. This is the last kind of bit of material you'll be expected to know for the final exam. So we're going to go through chapter 9 that concerns triads and second inversion. We're going to tack on just a little tiny bit of chapter 10, which starts to talk about form, and we're going to talk about cadences from chapter 10. So let's get started. So first of all, why do we need to use 6/4 chords? Well, much like our 6 chords, when you have a bunch of chords in root position next to each other, it's going to start to get boring. It's going to start to get really static. And movement and interesting textures is kind of what makes our music fun and interesting. So, you might use a 6/4 chord to arpeggiate your bass line. Here you've got that do, sol, mi, do happening in your bass line that makes for kind of a nice little tonic figure that's happening here. And underneath our melody, it's going to create some 1/6/4 and a 1/6 chord. So it's a way to keep the same harmony but make a little bit of textural and melodic interest. The other reason we might see 6/4 chords is over here we have a melodic bass line. Bass parts like to have fun too. They like to sing beautiful melodies or play beautiful melodies. This is from a Beethoven string quartet. So if you have a bass line where the bass is iterating the melody and the voices on top are kind of providing the harmonic structure, you're going to end up with some chords that kind of get turned upside down. You're going to end up with some chords in inversion because that's going to be what the melody requires. Other than that, this is an important point to make. You can't just stick 6/4 chords in as a substitute for the same triad in root position. Our 6/4 chords, and this is due to like a really long history of the church and medieval music and all that kind of stuff and the conventions of those kind of parts, it's considered an unstable sonority. It's not a place that you necessarily want to stay like a 1 or a 1/6 chord is, and so they're used usually to kind of move between places. So there are a few types of 6/4 chords depending on what comes before them and what comes after them, and they all have their own specific jobs and functions. So that's an important point. You can't just stick a 6/4 chord in instead of a root position chord. You have to have a specific reason for using that 6/4 chord. So let's talk about some of those. So there are 3 main types of 6/4 chords that we use. I chose the food truck kind of motif for this presentation because, first of all, look how freaking cute those ice cream trucks are. But also, all these things that we're learning about after root position chords, they're a way to kind of spice up your chord progressions in your music and the ways that we make music living and breathing and interesting and tasty, if you will. But much like ice cream or ketchup, you don't want to put it on everything. There's a time and place for all of those things, just like there's a time and place for all of these 6/4 chords. So we're going to talk about the 3 types of 6/4 chords. They're cadential 6/4s, passing 6/4s, and pedal 6/4s. Let's go. So before we talk about the types of 6/4 chords, what's really important about a lot of them is sort of where they get used metrically in a measure. So what meter does, in essence, what our time signatures are telling us, is that there's a pattern of weak and strong pulses. We divide the pulses up into weak and strong impulses. And so they're kind of these schema of how we rank kind of the strength of the beats. So if you're in 4/4, beat 1 is going to be the strongest beat in that measure. Beat 3 is going to be the second strongest beat of that measure. And then beat 2 and 4 are our weak beats. So 1 and 3 are the strongest, 2 and 4 are the weakest, with 1 being the stronger of the strong beats and 4 being the weaker of the weak beats. In 6/8, which is our duple meter, if you're counting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you're counting those small pulses, these big pulses are going to be where the impulse is. And when you count that, you can tell, because it's that 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a, it's really clear where those strong pulses are. When you're in a duple meter, which this is a duple meter as well, your first beat is going to be kind of your stronger impulse. Your second beat's going to be in your weaker impulse. When you're in 3/4, they're going to kind of go in order from strongest to weakest. So your first beat is your one truly strong beat in the measure. Your second beat is stronger than 3, but still not a strong beat. And then 3 is a totally weak beat. And you get that when you're counting that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's kind of how we feel and conceptualize 3/4. So here's a quick little shortcut for you guys on how those metrical accents work. If you're dealing with a duple meter, right? Don't worry about this combinations tab for now. When you're dealing with a duple meter, and the examples are 2, 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, anything where there's 2 beats per measure, you've got your strongest beat at the beginning and your weakest beat at the end. So this capital S is your strongest one. This capital W is going to be a weak beat. If you're in a quadruple meter, like 4/2, 4/4, or 12/8, anything where you've got 4 beats to the measure, your first beat is the strongest, your second beat is a weak. Your third beat is a strong beat, but it's a little bit less strong than that first one, and your fourth one is weak. Same thing for triple meter, you've got the strong, weak, weak pattern. If you are doing something in a really kind of slow 6, where you've got 6 beats per measure, it's going to be strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, weak. And remember, we conceptualize these 6 meters as duple meters a lot. So that kind of fits in with that strong and then weaker pattern there. And then the rest of these, if you find yourself working with a meter that's got 5 beats or 7 beats, you can understand using this chart the distribution of strong and weak beats. If you're like me and you've never seen 15/8 before this very moment, I figured out what that was this morning. It is a 5-beat meter where every beat is a compound beat. You don't have to know this. This is not related. You're kind of only responsible for these first 3. But how crazy that I've been doing this for a million years and I've never seen 15/8. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Isn't that crazy? You learn something new every day. So metrical accents, they're going to help you figure out what kind of 6/4 we're dealing with. Here they are again, cadential, passing, pedal. Now let's talk about them. So our most common is going to be our cadential 6/4. It's a 6/4 chord that comes between a 2 chord and a 5 chord. So it prolongs that dominant function. Even though it's technically a 1 chord, it's a 1 chord that's been kind of flipped upside down, it's an inversion, it functions as a dominant chord. It's going to prolong that dominant function and lead us to this root position 5 chord. So you can see kind of here how they're analyzed. These both are falling under that 5 kind of dominant umbrella sound. It's going to happen on a strong beat. So here we are in 4/4. Oh, let me explain what's happening in the example here. So this is that 1, 2, 6, 5, 1 progression. That's a really, really common tonic, predominant, dominant, back to tonic progression. But we can make that dominant area a little bit spicier by throwing in, right, some jalapenos in our hot dog. We put this 1/6/4 chord right before this 5 chord. It's technically all going to come out to the same function, but we're going to hear a little bit of intrigue. So it's going to happen on a strong beat. Here we're in 4/4. They didn't give us a time signature. I don't know why, but you can see there are 4 quarter notes per measure. On this third beat, which is the second strongest beat in the measure, we've got that 1/6/4 occurring. It's going to step down to the 5, and then our final 1 comes on that strong beat. If you want to hear what that sounds like, this is a great example, and they talk a little bit about cadential 6/4s. I'm not going to play that here just because when I try to play something from my computer onto the presentation, it sounds like absolute garbage. So you might see this also analyzed as a 5/6/4 chord. You might see 5/6/4 to 5 instead of 1/6/4 to 5, just because of the way these 2 notes above the bass are going to step down. As you can see, we've got a common tone, and then the other voices are stepping down here, and they step down to become the 3rd and the 5th of the 5 chord. So we're in E major. So our 5 chord is B, 5 is also the bass note of that 1-6-4 chord. So we've got our B, G, and our repeated B and our E here. The B gets held over because it's found in both the 1-6-4 and the 5 chords, the 5th scale degree of E major. And then our G sharp steps down to become F sharp, which is the 5th of that 5 chord. And then our E steps down to become our D sharp, which is the 3rd of that 5 chord, and the leading tone of our overall key. So it's going to push back up to E. So you might see it analyzed this way. If you see this, don't be confused, even though it's technically a 1 chord because it's just a 1 chord that's been flipped upside down. It's got a different bass note. It does get lumped in with this kind of dominant function 5 function chord. It's typically what it's going to lead to. If you want to hear it, click up here above the hot dog truck. So cadential 6-4, probably the most common use for a 6-4 chord. We also have what's called a passing 6-4. It's used to create this sort of interesting stepwise motion in the bass, but to pass between 2 chords that are kind of harmonically significant. So if we've got this 1 to 1-6, this tonic sonority, and we want to move between these different voicings of the chord but make it a little bit more interesting, and we want this ascending stepwise motion in the bass, we can go to this 5-6-4 chord that allows our bass to step up 1. We've got a common tone and then 2 steps down up here in the soprano and the alto part. And then it allows us to continue up to that 1-6, which is the re-voicing of that 1 chord. Also here we've got this 4-6 leading to the 2-6. We're kind of playing around in this subdominant area. So we stick this 1-6-4 in between, and it allows us to do that stepwise motion in the opposite direction. So we get to step that bass line down. So we're moving from a predominant area to a passing 6-4 to a dominant area. It falls on a weak beat. So we're in 3-4 here. So 1 is our strongest beat, and then 2 is a weak beat. So those passing 6-4s are going to always happen on a weak beat, and they're not harmonically significant. They are creating some motion, but they're not really leading us anywhere functionally. We're not really moving to a new functional area. We're using these to get between tonic and another voicing of tonic, or predominant, and another voicing of a predominant chord. They're not harmonically significant. That's the reason why your book analyzes them in parentheses. They're important, they're there. It's important to recognize where that sound comes from, but it's not a significant harmonic event. It's not going to push you toward that goal. So these specific progressions here are the most common uses of passing 6-4s. So you're most commonly going to see your 6-4 chords in the form of this 5-6-4 in between 1 and 1-6. That's one really common use of the passing 6-4. Probably the most common way that you're going to see it. The other use of the passing 6-4 that's the most common is going to be this 1-6-4 going between a 4-6 and a 2-6. So kind of prolonging that predominant area. If you want to hear it, you can click here. If this is what I remember that it is, I'm going to click it just to see. Oops, sorry. Yeah, this is really cool. So if you want more explanation on this, don't look at my YouTube viewing history. All I do is watch Bon Appetit videos, which is probably where the hot dog theme came from, because I'm thinking about food at all times. But Scott Watson's videos are really great. If you need a little bit more explanation, if you'd like these things explained to you in a slightly different way and you'd like to listen to them, this video is super short and it's going to cover all types of your 6-4 chords, and it's really cool. So check this out. This is just a link to hear that passing 6-4 chord. Great. Our last type of 6-4 chords is going to be our pedal 6-4. So in our pedal 6-4, we're moving between kind of 2 different iterations of the same chord, back to the same chord. What's going to happen is we have a chord. We're going to allow the 3rd and the 5th of that chord to step up to create a 6-4 chord whose root is a 5th lower than where we started. I'll show you what that means in just a second. It's going to always happen on a weak beat. So here we're in 3-4, and these 6-4s are occurring on beat 2, which is weak. It's going to allow for some really smooth stepwise motion both in and out of the chord. We'll talk about voice leading more later, but for most of these 6-4 chords, you're really just kind of stepping around. So the audio example here is another Dr. Watson example. It's not actually what's here, but just take a look at what's happening. This is our original example. We're moving from tonic to dominant back to tonic. So we've got a root position 1 chord, a root position 5 chord, and a root position 1 chord. And the harmonic speed here is pretty slow. We've got one sort of harmonic change every 3 beats, every measure. If we want to spice that up a little bit without changing sort of the overall functional harmonic narrative of what we've got going on here, we can stick these pedal 6/4s in. So we're in F major, so we've got our F repeated, our A, and our C. We're going to hold our F through the whole measure, and we're just going to step the 5th of the chord up and the 3rd of the chord up. That's going to create that 4/6/4 chord. So instead of an F chord, now we're dealing with this B, D, F chord. So we're dealing with the 4, sorry, B flat, D, F. So we're dealing with the 4 and F major, but it's a 4/6/4. So all we had to do to get there was just step up these 2 voices. Then we're going to step them back down and end up back at 1. It doesn't really do doesn't really do anything harmonically, but it's going to prolong that same chord, that same sonority, just kind of breaking up the sound in the middle. Same for here, we've got our 5 chord, and here those roots are repeated kind of here in the bass and the tenor. We allow the 3rd and the 5th of the chord to step up to become the 6th and the 4th above the bass that's indicated by the 1/6/4. And then we step back down. We've still got a whole tonic function measure, a whole dominant function measure, back to a dominant function. Dominant, new word. Back to a tonic function measure. So that is your pedal 6/4. If you want to listen to it, you can click here. So let's talk about how we write these. So these get voiced a little bit different. Typically, for our root position chords, we usually want to double the bass note, which is also going to be the root note of the chord. For the 1/6 chords, we have a little bit more freedom. Remember, we've got that hierarchy of the most common way is to double what the soprano is doing. Doubling what the bass is doing is also pretty common. So we've kind of got a hierarchy of a little more flexibility here. Here, you're pretty much going to want to double the bass note, which is going to be the 5th of the chord. If you're working in 3-part textures and you have to leave something out, you can leave out the root or the 3rd, which should raise a red flag to you because I'm always telling you can't leave out the root and the 3rd, but that should just tell you that these chords are different from anything that we've seen yet. Yeah, so 6/4 chords, that's kind of the moral to the story, is 6/4 chords need to be treated like they have their own rules and regulations. You can't just stick them in somewhere. But what we've noticed with all of these kind of different types of 6/4 chords is we're stepping up typically or stepping down to something. They're kind of designed to smooth out our voice leading. And so when you voice lead to and away from these chords, your voice leading is going to be pretty smooth. You're going to be holding common tones and moving everything else in a stepwise motion here. And you have some parallel thirds, right, which are totally cool. So parallel fifths are not as much of an issue when you're dealing with these 6/4 chords, as long as you're using them in the correct ways. These are some examples of some ways that we've got a couple of doublings of the 5th where the root and the 3rd is left out. Remember, I don't care as much that you know about 3-part textures. I care more about 4-part textures. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and I will come back and talk about the cadences part of this later. And then all your questions will be at the end of the cadence video. So stay tuned. I'll be back. Bye.